8 mice, 4 males, and 4 females were introduced into a meticulously crafted perfect world. This habitat provided them with unlimited food and water, ensured there were no diseases or predators, and was completely devoid of any discernible threats. Yet 5 years later, every single mouse was dead, with not one death attributable to any condition a veterinarian could possibly diagnose. This chilling account describes Universe 25, an experiment often cited as the most disturbing ever conducted on a society. In 1968, American scientist John Calhoun embarked on creating what he termed a paradise for mice. No detail was overlooked. Soft nesting material was available in every corner, the temperature was held perfectly stable, and the cages were cleaned by hand on a precise schedule. The initial 8 mice were chosen as the healthiest specimens from the breeding colony of the National Institutes of Health. Calhoun, an ethologist, had dedicated his entire career to answering one profound question: what happens to a society when the challenges of life cease to exist? He had pursued this answer for 2 decades, meticulously building 24 previous versions of this experiment. His earlier studies took place in diverse settings, from a quarter-acre forest in Maryland to barn enclosures and various laboratory rooms. Each of these prior experiments presented a slightly different paradise for rats or mice, environments characterized by no scarcity, no predators, and no means of escape. In every single iteration, Calhoun observed the same disturbing pattern. The population would initially explode, followed by a dramatic spike in violence. Mating behaviors would become distorted, often hyperactive and twisted, before collapsing into profound apathy, ultimately leading to the colony's demise. Having documented this pattern 24 times, Universe 25 was conceived as the ultimate, definitive experiment, a flawless study designed to provide a final, undeniable answer. He established it within a federal research lab in Maryland, a 9-foot square enclosure ingeniously designed with walk-up apartments stacked along every wall, accessible via mesh tunnels running from floor to ceiling. Each apartment was equipped with food hoppers that never ran empty and water bottles that perpetually flowed. Calhoun calculated that this expansive space could comfortably sustain approximately 3,800 mice. However, it would never even approach that number. On day 1, the 8 founding mice were placed inside and the lid was sealed. For the first 104 days, a period of relative calm prevailed. The mice explored their new environment, learned its geography, and established their sleeping territories. Then the first litters were born, and the population began to double every 55 days, signifying an exponential increase. By day 315, over 600 animals resided within the enclosure, climbing over each other on the ramps, sleeping in vast piles, and fiercely competing for nesting spaces in the higher apartments. This marked the critical juncture where the social order began to unravel. In a typical mouse colony, when the population surpasses the territory's capacity, surplus mice naturally emigrate, seeking new ground elsewhere. Inside Universe 25, there was no elsewhere. The young males, with nowhere to go and no meaningful role to fill, began to drift aimlessly into the center of the enclosure. They formed listless pools of bodies. Calhoun would observe them for hours, doing nothing. These males had no territories to defend, no fights to win, and no females to court. They were healthy, well-fed, yet utterly devoid of purpose. When one of them was attacked by another mouse, he would offer no resistance, simply absorbing the damage, then standing up, moving a few feet, and lying down again. However, not all males succumbed to quiet resignation. Simultaneously, a second group emerged at the opposite extreme. These males were frantic and indiscriminate in their aggression. They moved through the enclosure faster than any other mice, forcefully intruding into nests that other males were attempting to defend. They entirely bypassed the traditional courtship rituals that other mice still observed, refusing to be deterred even by violence from dominant males. And in the most affected sections of the colony, behaviors began to manifest that were entirely unprecedented in any functioning mouse society. The females, in turn, responded with their own form of retreat. Those unable to secure a stable place within the social hierarchy climbed to the highest apartments, choosing to live in isolation. They ceased interacting with males and stopped reproducing altogether. Calhoun also identified a phenomenon he termed the behavioral sink. Despite food being equally available throughout the enclosure, the mice compulsively crowded around a few specific feeders. They seemed unwilling to eat alone. The presence of other mice had become so fundamentally intertwined with their feeding instinct that an empty feeder, regardless of how much food it potentially held, was useless to them if others weren't present. The crowding around these few stations worsened exponentially, while vast portions of the enclosure remained almost entirely untouched. Then the mothers who were still attempting to raise pups began to fail in a far more distressing manner. Defending a nest in such an environment required constant, exhausting effort. The males who had initially claimed territories became worn out from patrolling and ceased protecting their families. This left the mothers to defend their nests alone while still nursing their young. Driven to desperation, they began to turn on their own offspring, abandoning them in scattered locations around the enclosure. Some mothers completely forgot which pups belonged to them, while others entirely stopped recognizing their own as theirs. In the most severe instances, mothers resorted to eating their own offspring. In certain sections of the colony, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. Calhoun would later conclude that by this point, the very social fabric of the colony was effectively dead. While the individual bodies remained alive, the intricate structure that held them together as a species had disintegrated. The few pups that did manage to survive were raised by mothers who exhibited little to no care for their well-being. Consequently, these young mice had no positive model of what a functioning life within this peculiar paradise entailed. When they matured, their behavior was unlike anything Calhoun had ever witnessed. The males of this new generation never engaged in fights, never attempted to mate, and never participated in any social activity whatsoever. Their lives revolved solely around eating, sleeping, and an obsessive dedication to self-grooming. Their fur remained perpetually perfect, a testament to their complete avoidance of conflict. They moved through the colony as if no other mouse existed. Calhoun christened them the beautiful ones. Externally, they appeared to be the healthiest mice in the entire colony, yet functionally they were dead. They never attempted to reproduce, nor could they socialize. Their nervous systems had developed within a world where every conceivable social role was already filled, or rather no longer accessible to them. They had, in essence, simply opted out of the species. On day 560, the population reached its peak at 2,200 mice. It would never grow higher. The last successful conception within Universe 25 occurred on day 920. After this point, no new mice were born. The colony continued to age. The beautiful ones persisted in their obsessive grooming. The secluded females remained isolated in their high apartments. Pockets of violence carried on, but with no discernible purpose left to them. One by one, the mice died of old age, with no new generations rising to replace them. On May 23, 1973, the last mouse in Universe 25 perished, 4 years and 10 months after Calhoun first shut the lid. He famously wrote that the mice had experienced 2 deaths. The first, he elaborated, was the death of the spirit, a demise that occurred years before the physical death of the body. When his groundbreaking paper was published, the world quickly embraced the most apparent interpretation. Comfort kills, abundance kills. A life without struggle is a life that ultimately destroys itself. The vivid image of the beautiful ones, imperfect in appearance yet quietly extinct, became one of the most widely cited metaphors of the late 20th century. Urban planners, religious leaders, and politicians across all ideologies and issues found something in the plight of those mice that they could wield as a warning about the perceived decay of modern life. However, that popular interpretation was not what Calhoun himself actually conveyed. His true conclusion was clearly articulated within his paper, in his own words. For an animal as complex as a human being, he wrote, a similar collapse was not just possible, it was logical. He further clarified, if the number of individuals capable of filling meaningful roles greatly exceeds the number of roles available, only violence and disruption can follow. Thus, the real killer was not comfort itself, but rather the disappearance of meaningful roles. When the population expanded beyond the supply of purposeful roles the colony could offer, the mice who found no place simply ceased to function. The fighters had no one to challenge. The mothers found their nests unprotected. The young grew up with no expected inheritance of purpose or status. The fundamental structure that gave each individual mouse a reason to participate in the species simply evaporated. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. What ultimately vanished was something no one had initially considered to include in this paradise. Comfort did not directly kill them. Instead, it subtly removed the essential friction that makes being alive feel meaningful. And here lies the often overlooked part of Calhoun's legacy. He himself was not a doomsayer. He dedicated the remainder of his career not to predicting societal collapse, but to actively seeking ways to prevent it. He continued to build new universes, constantly altering the variables. Calhoun was tirelessly searching for the singular element he could reintroduce into a paradise that would allow it to remain functional. He firmly believed it could be done. He held an unwavering conviction that humans possessed the capacity to choose a different path than the mice did. He theorized that as physical space contracts, the only viable way forward is to expand ourselves into conceptual space, into ideas, into networks, into the challenging work of forging roles that previously did not exist. He termed this ideational generativity, a rather lengthy phrase for a remarkably simple yet profound idea. The way out, he posited, is to continually create new reasons to exist. Yet the stark reality of the experiment remains etched in the data. A perfectly designed paradise, 8 mice, 5 years, a complete extinction, and a cause of death that no toxicology report would ever be able to precisely name. The mice had no choice in their fate. We, however, still do. What happens next truly rests upon us.